The moment my ex lifted his wine glass and smiled at me like I was the punchline, I realized some men don't come to dinner to eat. They come to watch you break. The restaurant was the kind of place people posted about just to prove they'd been there. All amber lighting and white tablecloths and waiters who moved like silence in polished shoes. A place where a 12-ounce ribeye cost more than my electric bill, and everyone seemed born knowing which fork to use first. I never belonged somewhere like that, and Ethan knew it. That was probably why he chose it. He sat across from me in a navy blazer that looked expensive and familiar in the worst way, leaning back like he owned the room. Like inviting me here had been an act of generosity instead of cruelty in slow motion. "You still do that thing," he said, turning his glass by the stem, watching the red wine catch the light. "You make everything feel so serious." I stared at the bread plate between us because it was easier than looking at the woman at the next table pretending not to listen. "I came because you said you wanted to apologize," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. Ethan laughed under his breath. "I did apologize. I said I was sorry things ended the way they did." Then he tilted his head, eyes sliding over my black dress, the one I only wore for job interviews, funerals, and mistakes. "But let's be honest, Claire. You were never really built for my world." There it was. Not loud enough to make a scene, just sharp enough to leave a mark. The old Ethan. The one who could smile while pushing the knife in with a napkin-folded hand. Around us, silverware clinked against china. A woman laughed too brightly near the bar, and somewhere behind me a piano drifted through the room like smoke. I pressed my fingertips into my lap to keep them from trembling. "Then why invite me here?" I asked. "Closure," he said. "And maybe because I thought you'd finally admit I was right." He leaned in then, lowering his voice, making it worse somehow. More intimate. More humiliating. "You always wanted a life bigger than you could actually handle. You wanted nice places, nice things, a man with ambition. But Claire, you don't fit in rooms like this. You look nervous just holding the menu." Heat rushed into my face so fast I thought I might actually stop breathing. He knew exactly what to say because once upon a time, I had trusted him with every insecurity I'd ever had. That was the thing about men like Ethan. They memorized your wounds and called it love. I should have stood up. I should have walked out before the appetizer plates arrived, before my dignity got served alongside the sparkling water. But shame is a strange kind of paralysis. It keeps you seated long after your spirit has already left the table. "I'm done," I whispered, reaching for my purse. That was when Ethan smiled again, slow and satisfied, and said the one thing he knew would make the whole room feel suddenly smaller. "Claire, please, sit down. You should be grateful someone like me was ever willing to choose you at all." And from somewhere behind me, low and calm and impossibly controlled, a man's voice cut through the candlelight and the piano and the sound of my heartbeat trying to outrun my body. "Be careful," he said. "You're speaking to my future wife." The room did not erupt. It went still. Not the ordinary kind of quiet, either. This was the kind that made the hair lift on the back of my neck, the kind that rolled across the white tablecloths and polished glass like an invisible wave, leaving every conversation stranded in its wake. My hand froze around the strap of my purse. Ethan blinked once, then turned toward the voice behind me with the irritated disbelief of a man and used to interruption. I turned more slowly. The first thing I noticed was not his face. It was the way the staff reacted to him. A waiter near the bar straightened so fast he nearly dropped a tray. The hostess by the front stand lowered her eyes. Even the pianist faltered for half a second before continuing, softer now, like the room itself had decided it should not compete with this man's presence. He stood a few feet from our table in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been made for him and no one else, one hand resting lightly on the back of an empty chair, as if he had risen from dinner only because something in this room had offended his sense of order. Tall, dark-haired, composed, he wore authority the way other men wore cologne. Effortlessly, dangerously. "I am sorry," he said, though he did not sound sorry at all. His gaze stayed on Ethan. "Did I interrupt your performance?" A couple at the next table looked down into their plates with the guilty focus of people pretending they had not just heard everything. Ethan gave a short laugh, brittle around the edges. "This is a private conversation." "No," the stranger said calmly. "It stopped being private when you decided to make her humiliation part of the atmosphere." My throat tightened. He had not looked at me yet. That somehow made it worse. Or better. I could not tell. Ethan leaned back in his chair, but I saw it then, the smallest shift in him. The confidence was still there, but it had gone careful. And you are. The man stepped closer, measured and unhurried. Someone with enough influence to suggest you choose your next sentence very wisely. His voice never rose. It did not have to. There are men who command a room by being the loudest in it, and then there are men who never need volume because everyone already knows what happens when they are crossed. He finally turned toward me, and for one disorienting second the rest of the restaurant blurred at the edges. His eyes were a deep, impossible gray, steady and unreadable, and when they met mine, the heat of humiliation in my chest shifted into something stranger. Not relief exactly. Relief felt too simple. This felt like being seen when I had been trying very hard not to exist. "Miss Bennett," he said, his tone gentler now, as if my name deserved careful handling. I had never told him my name. The realization struck so suddenly I almost forgot to breathe. Ethan caught it too. "How do you know her?" he asked, too quickly. The man looked back at him with cool boredom. "Better question," he said. "Why did you think a woman like her would leave this restaurant believing what a man like you says?" Ethan pushed his chair back an inch with a sharp scrape against the floor. "You do not know anything about us." "I know enough," the man replied. His gaze flicked to Ethan's half-empty wine glass, then to the smirk that had not quite left his mouth. "I know that confidence built on cruelty is usually a disguise for mediocrity." A soft sound escaped someone at a nearby table. Not laughter exactly. More like shock, trying not to become admiration. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Claire," he said, turning to me as if I were still his audience, still his to manage. "Are you really going to let some stranger do this?" Before I could answer, the man beside us pulled out the empty chair across from me and spoke with the same quiet certainty that had already changed the entire night. "She is not letting me do anything," he said. "I am simply correcting the way this evening was going to end." Then he looked at me again, and this time there was no coldness in his face at all. "If you are willing," he said, "I would prefer you never sit across from disrespect again." For a second, I forgot how to move. The candle between us burned with a small, steady flame, and I stared at this man as if he had stepped out of some place that did not belong to ordinary life and into mine by mistake. Ethan gave a quiet scoff, but it landed weakly now, stripped of all the easy confidence he had worn when this night was still under his control. "This is ridiculous," he said, glancing around as though he might find the room ready to side with him. Nobody did. Not the couple at the next table pretending to study the dessert menu. Not the waiter standing perfectly still beside the service station. Not even me. The stranger remained beside my chair, one hand resting on the carved wood at its back, his posture relaxed in a way that somehow made him seem even more dangerous. "Ridiculous," he repeated, almost thoughtfully. No, cruel was ridiculous. Public humiliation over lobster and overpriced Cabernet was ridiculous. "I am being merciful." Ethan's face hardened. "Merciful?" The man gave the faintest nod. "Because if I were interested in embarrassing you the way you embarrassed her, this conversation would be much longer." I should have been alarmed. Honestly, I was. But underneath the alarm was something warm and disorienting, something I had not felt in months. Protection. Not the kind that asks for permission to exist. The kind that simply arrives and stands between you and the thing trying to diminish you. Ethan turned back to me, and for the first time all evening, his voice lost its sharp edge. "Claire, come on. You do not even know this guy." "No," the stranger said before I could answer. "But I know men like you." His eyes stayed on Ethan, cool and level. Men who mistake a woman's patience for weakness. Men who only feel tall when someone kinder is seated in front of them. Ethan rose halfway from his chair, then seemed to think better of it. The movement was small, but I noticed the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth, the way he avoided looking directly at the two men in dark suits who had quietly appeared near the hallway leading to the bar. I had not seen them arrive. That unsettled me more than anything else. The stranger finally pulled the chair across from me a few inches and sat down with the smooth confidence of someone who had never once doubted whether he belonged anywhere. Up close, he was even more striking, not because he was handsome, though he was, but because every detail about him looked chosen with care. The silver watch at his wrist, the crisp white shirt beneath the charcoal jacket, the expression on his face, composed enough to pass for polite if you ignored the fact that the entire room had bent around him. He looked at me directly. "You do not have to stay another minute longer than you want to," he said. His voice was lower now, and somehow that was harder to withstand than his confrontation with Ethan. "But you also do not have to leave ashamed." My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Nobody had said anything like that to me in a very long time. Ethan let out a harsh breath. "You are actually buying this?" he asked me. "Claire, he just walked over here and claimed you like some kind of enough." The word was quiet, but it came from me. I had not planned to say it. It simply rose up from somewhere beneath the humiliation and the anger and all the swallowed things I had been carrying since the day Ethan made me feel like love had to be earned by shrinking myself. Both men looked at me. My pulse pounded in my ears. "You do not get to talk to me like that anymore," I said, and my voice shook, but it did not break. Ethan stared at me as if I had become someone unfamiliar. Maybe I had. Maybe that was what happened when shame finally got tired of sitting still. The stranger beside us leaned back slightly, not interrupting, not rescuing me from my own words, and somehow that felt more respectful than anything else he had done. Ethan laughed once, bitter and disbelieving. "So this is what we are doing? You are going to leave with him now?" I reached for my purse again, this time with steady hands. "I am going to leave because I should have done it 20 minutes ago." The silence that followed felt enormous. Ethan's expression shifted, frustration giving way to calculation, as if he were trying to recover the night by finding one last thing that could still wound me. "You always do this," he said. "You get emotional, and then you let some fantasy distract you from reality." The man beside me turned his head just enough to look at him. "Reality," he said evenly, "is that she is walking out of here with her dignity. Whether you learn from this is entirely your problem." Then he stood and moved my chair back with deliberate care, offering me his hand like the entire restaurant was witnessing not a scandal, but a correction. And as I looked at his open hand, at the calm certainty in his gray eyes, I had the strange, impossible feeling that accepting it was going to change far more than just the ending of one awful dinner. His hand stayed there between us, steady and unhurried, as if he already knew I would take it eventually and was patient enough to let me decide what kind of woman I wanted to be when I did. The restaurant held its breath with me. I could feel it in the stillness, in the way forks stopped halfway to mouths, in the way a server near the wall suddenly found the wine labels on a rack absolutely fascinating. I looked at his hand, then at Ethan, and saw for the first time how small cruelty could make a man look when it no longer had control of the room. So I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine with careful warmth, not possessive, not performative, just certain. He helped me to my feet like I was someone worth rising for. That nearly undid me more than everything Ethan had said. I kept my chin level anyway. Pride is a fragile thing when it is recovering in public. "Claire," Ethan said, sharper now, a warning creeping into his voice. "Do not do this." The stranger did not even turn toward him. "She already is," he said. Then he guided me one step away from the table, and somehow that single step felt longer than the entire dinner had. Ethan stood fully this time, napkin falling beside his chair. "I am talking to her." The man beside me finally looked over, and whatever Ethan saw in his face made him stop before the next sentence formed. "No," he said softly. "You were talking at her. That privilege has expired." My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it over the piano. We moved toward the front of the restaurant under 100 invisible eyes. I hated being watched. I had always hated it. But this was different from the attention Ethan had forced on me. That had felt like exposure. This felt like the room was witnessing a verdict. Near the hostess stand, one of the men in dark suits stepped forward and opened the door before we reached it. Cold night air slipped inside, carrying the scent of rain on concrete and the faint sound of traffic from the avenue. Manhattan glittered beyond the glass like it had not just watched my life tilt off its axis. The moment we stepped outside, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier shower, reflecting the gold light from the restaurant windows. Black cars lined the curb, sleek and silent. The city moved around us in flashes of headlights and distant sirens, and people in expensive coats hurrying toward places where nobody cried in the restroom between courses. He released my hand then, and the sudden absence of it left a strange imprint in my palm. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a normal question. So impossibly normal after everything that I almost laughed. Instead, I wrapped my arms around myself and looked at him fully beneath the glow of the awning. No, I said honestly, but I will be. Something softened in his expression, brief enough that I almost missed it. That is a good answer. Up close in the city light, he looked older than I had first thought, maybe early 30s, with dark hair brushed neatly back, and the kind of face people probably trusted by instinct until they noticed the reserve in his eyes. Those eyes were still on me now, gray and calm and far too observant. "Who are you?" I asked. One corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "A man who dislikes seeing grace wasted on the wrong audience." That is not an answer. It is the one I am giving first. Behind the glass doors, I could see Ethan arguing with the maitre d', all wounded ego and restless hands. The sight of him should have made me feel shaky again. Instead, standing under the shelter of that awning with this impossible stranger beside me, I felt something else begin to return. Not comfort. Not yet. Something quieter. My footing. "You knew my name?" I said. "Yes." "How?" His gaze shifted past me for half a second, toward the city, toward one of the waiting black sedans, then back to me. "Because I make it my business to know who is worth noticing." That answer should have alarmed me. Maybe it did. But before I could decide, one of the suited men approached and murmured, "Mr. Moretti, the car is ready." The name landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. Moretti. Even I knew that name. Everyone in this city knew it, though mostly in lowered voices and unfinished sentences. I looked at him again, really looked, and felt the night change shape all over again. Adrian Moretti inclined his head once, as if confirming what I had already guessed, then said in that same calm, devastating voice, "Claire, I think tonight has already asked enough of you. Let me get you home before your past mistakes tonight for permission to follow." The name should have made me step back. It should have sent every survival instinct I had straight to the surface and told me to thank him, call a cab, and disappear into the safest version of my ordinary life. Instead, I stood there under the restaurant awning with the city breathing cold around us, and all I could think was that ordinary had never once stood up for me the way this man just had. Adrian Moretti watched my face with the kind of attention that noticed everything and revealed nothing. "You know who I am," he said. It was not arrogance, just fact. I swallowed. Enough to know people do not usually say your name loudly. A faint shift touched his expression, something almost amused. That is often wise. One of the black sedans waited at the curb, engine running, its headlights cutting pale beams through the damp night. The suited man who had spoken to him stepped back to give us privacy, though even his silence felt deliberate. Nothing around Adrian seemed accidental. Not his timing, not his words, not the way the city itself appeared to make room for him. I looked through the glass doors again. Ethan was no longer arguing. He was staring out at us instead, his face pale with the delayed realization that the night had moved beyond his control in ways he did not understand. My stomach tightened. Adrian followed my glance without turning his head. "He will not bother you tonight," he said. "How can you know that?" I asked. His eyes came back to mine. "Because he now understands that bothering you would be a very poor decision." There was no threat in his tone. That somehow made it more convincing. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, suddenly aware of the chill settling through my dress. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He slipped off his suit jacket and held it out to me. "You do not have to," I said automatically. "I know," he replied. "Take it anyway." The fabric was warm when I pulled it around my shoulders, expensive enough that I could feel the quality instantly, lined and heavy, and carrying a clean, subtle scent I could not name. It made me look even more ridiculous, probably, swallowed up by a powerful stranger's jacket on a Manhattan sidewalk after one of the worst dinners of my life. But for the first time that evening, I felt sheltered. "Thank you," I said quietly. Adrian inclined his head once, as though gratitude embarrassed him less than vulnerability did. "Tell me where you live, Claire." Every caution I had ever learned lit up at once. Do not get into a car with a man you do not know. Do not trust elegant manners over instinct. Do not let a beautiful rescue distract you from basic self-preservation. He must have seen the hesitation in my face because his voice softened, not weaker, just more precise. "You can send your address to the driver instead, if you prefer. You can call a friend first. You can even ask me to leave and keep the jacket." I am not interested in taking your choices away from you. The words landed deep, deeper than they should have. Ethan had always acted like every compromise was romance, every crossed boundary a misunderstanding, every apology something I should feel lucky to receive. Adrian, a man whose name carried weight I could barely comprehend, was standing in front of me, making room for my no. I realized then that power was not only in what a man could do. It was also in what he chose not to force. Upper West Side, I said, before I could think myself out of it. West 78th. Adrian nodded once to the driver, who opened the rear passenger door without a word. You will be home in 15 minutes, Adrian said. 20 with traffic. You are not coming? I asked, and hated how surprised I sounded. That almost smile appeared again, gone before it fully formed. I think I have already altered your evening enough. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a flicker of something I was not ready to examine. Before I could answer, the restaurant doors opened behind us. I did not need to turn to know it was Ethan. I felt his presence the way you feel old weather coming back. Claire, he called, trying for calm and landing somewhere closer to desperation. Adrian did not look back. He only stepped slightly to the side, enough to block Ethan's path to me without making a spectacle of it. I think, Adrian said, his voice cool as the rain-dark pavement, that tonight would improve greatly if you learned when a woman has already chosen to leave. Ethan stopped. I could hear it in the silence, in the way his next breath came harder. I stepped toward the car before he could say my name again. The driver held the door. I paused with one hand on the frame and looked back at Adrian. Street light caught the edges of his face, turning his features to sharp gold and shadow. He met my gaze steadily, as if this was not the end of an embarrassing dinner, but the beginning of a promise neither of us had fully agreed to yet. Why did you really do it? I asked. Why step in? For the first time all night, his answer took a second. Because, he said at last, some things offend me. Men who confuse humiliation with charm are one of them. I got into the car before my expression betrayed how much that mattered. The leather seat was cool, the interior quiet enough to hear my own breathing, and as the door closed, sealing me inside warmth and darkness and a future I had not seen coming, Adrian bent slightly toward the window and said the words that followed me all the way home. Claire, do not answer his calls tonight. If he reaches for your peace again, he will find that I do not ignore repetition. The drive uptown took 19 minutes. I counted because I did not know what else to do with my hands, my thoughts, or the expensive jacket still wrapped around my shoulders like evidence that the last hour had actually happened. Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows in ribbons of reflected light, storefront glass and yellow cabs, and pedestrians hurrying through the cool night, with collars turned up against the wind. Inside the sedan, everything was quiet enough to hear the soft hum of the engine and the uneven rhythm of my breathing, trying to become normal again. The driver never asked questions. He only confirmed my building number once, then guided the car through the city with the smooth precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times for people far more complicated than me. My phone lit up in my lap before we hit Columbus Circle. Ethan. Then again, and again. His name flashed across the screen until it looked less like a person and more like a warning sign. I stared at it while Adrian's last words echoed through me. Do not answer his calls tonight. It should not have mattered that much. It definitely should not have mattered more, because he said it in that low, steady voice that made even simple instructions feel like a line drawn across danger. But it did. So I silenced the phone and turned it face down beside me. By the time the sedan pulled up in front of my building, I felt wrong. Out in a way that had nothing to do with crying and everything to do with being seen too clearly in one night by two very different men. One had memorized my weak points and pressed on them for sport. The other had walked into the middle of my humiliation and acted like my dignity was something worth defending. I was still not sure what to do with that. My apartment building stood exactly as it always had. 6 stories of worn brick and narrow windows squeezed between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner that closed too early every Friday. Familiar, unimpressive, safe. Or at least it had always been safe before tonight taught me that safety and loneliness were not the same thing. The driver stepped out before I could touch the door handle and opened it for me. Thank you, I said as I gathered my purse and stood on the sidewalk. He gave a polite nod. Mr. Moretti asked me to wait until you are inside. There it was again. That impossible certainty rearranging things in my life as if he had a right to care whether I made it to my own front door. I should have argued. Instead, I just nodded and crossed the sidewalk beneath the weak glow of the entry light. My phone buzzed again before I reached the second-floor landing. Then a text. Then another. I unlocked my apartment and closed the door behind me, leaning back against it while silence rushed in around me. The place looked exactly the way I had left it that morning. A paperback on the arm of the couch. My coffee mug in the sink. A throw blanket half-folded where I had rushed out for work. The soft yellow lamp in the corner casting tired light over the room. Small. Modest. Mine. I slipped Adrian's jacket off slowly and laid it across the back of a chair with a care that felt suspiciously close to reverence. Then I looked at my phone. 9 missed calls. For texts. The first one read, "We need to talk like adults." The second said, "You embarrassed me in there." The third was longer, the tone already shifting toward accusation, toward rewriting the story fast enough that I might doubt my own memory. By the fourth, the old familiar pattern was back in place. "You always overreact. You made a scene." I was only joking. My stomach turned. It was incredible how quickly cruelty changed clothes and called itself confusion. I dropped the phone onto the couch like it had burned me and walked to the kitchen for water, but my hands were shaking too much to drink. I set the glass down untouched and stared out the window above the sink. Across the street, a laundromat glowed blue-white under fluorescent lights. A woman in scrubs was folding clothes from a wire cart, while a little boy slept across 3 plastic chairs. Ordinary life. Ordinary exhaustion. And here I was in my tiny kitchen wearing mascara I had not cried off yet, trying to understand why a man like Adrian Moretti had looked at me as if I mattered before I even knew how to matter to myself again. My phone vibrated once more, this time with a number I did not recognize. For one wild second I thought of him. The idea was ridiculous. Men like Adrian did not call women home after one dramatic dinner rescue. Men like Adrian probably had entire floors of buildings to occupy, and people whose full-time job was making sure no detail in their world slipped out of place. Still, my pulse jumped when I unlocked the screen. The message was short. Sleep. He does not get to occupy the rest of your night. No name. No signature. He did not need one. I read it twice, then a third time, standing barefoot on my kitchen tile with the city humming beyond my window, and his words doing something dangerous inside me. They made me feel protected. Not controlled. Not managed. Protected. That difference was so sharp it almost hurt. I walked back to the chair and touched the sleeve of his jacket, just once, as if confirming it was real. Then I locked my phone, ignored Ethan for the 10th and final time, and went to bed in a silence that no longer felt empty. It felt watched over. And sometime after midnight, just as sleep finally began to pull me under, my buzzer rang. The buzzer ripped through my apartment at 12:17 in the morning, loud enough to yank me upright before I even understood where I was. For one disoriented second, I thought I had dreamed the entire night. The restaurant. Ethan. Adrian. The black sedan. The text message that felt less like words and more like a hand at the center of my back, steadying me from a distance. Then the buzzer sounded again, sharp and impatient this time, and every nerve in my body went tight. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. No new message from the unknown number. No warning. Just the dark screen reflecting my own pale face back at me. The apartment felt too quiet around the sound, my bedroom shadows suddenly too long, the old radiator clicking in the corner like nervous fingers. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the first thing within reach. Adrian's jacket still draped over the chair where I had left it. I pulled it around myself without thinking. It smelled faintly of cedar and cold night air, and somehow that grounded me enough to move. The buzzer went off a third time just as I reached the intercom by the front door. "Who is it?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded through the speaker. Silence. Then a breath. Then Ethan. "Claire, open the door." My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a step in the dark. I pressed my free hand flat against the wall beside the intercom to steady myself. "No, come on," he said, sounding tired now, wounded in that deliberate way he used whenever he wanted sympathy to do the work that honesty never could. "We need to talk." "We already did." "That was not talking, Claire. That was you making a scene and letting some stranger play hero." My pulse thudded in my ears. I looked through the peephole, even though I knew he was downstairs and out of sight. It did not matter. I still needed to do something with my fear besides wear it. Go home, Ethan. Not until you open the door. There it was. The shift. The part where request turned into insistence and insistence pretended it was love. The old panic started to creep up my throat, familiar and humiliating. But then another voice rose in memory, low and calm and impossible to ignore. You can ask me to leave and keep the jacket. I am not interested in taking your choices away from you. Strange how protection can echo louder than fear when you really need it. I lifted my chin even though he could not see me. I said no. Ethan exhaled, hard enough that the speaker crackled. You are seriously doing this because of him? I am doing this because of me. The silence after that felt different, less certain. I realized then that men like Ethan depended on hesitation the way fire depends on oxygen. The moment you stop feeding it, the shape changes. Claire, he said again, softer now, trying a different mask. I was upset. I went too far. Just let me explain in person. I closed my eyes. 6 months ago, that voice would have worked on me. 3 months ago, maybe even last week, I would have let guilt unlock the door before common sense had the chance to stand up. But tonight had rearranged something. Maybe humiliation had finally burned the last of my denial away. Maybe Adrian Moretti had stepped into one terrible dinner and shown me what respect looked like so clearly that I could never again confuse it with negotiation. No, I said for the third time, and this one came out steady. Do not come here at midnight. Do not buzz my apartment again. Do not ask me to prove I am a good person by giving you access to my peace. The quiet on the other end stretched so long I wondered if he had walked away. Then he laughed once, low and bitter. You really think you are untouchable now? I felt the question like ice, but I answered anyway. I think I am done being reachable by people who enjoy hurting me. Then I released the intercom button with shaking fingers and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. No buzz, no voice, just the pounding of my own heart and the old building settling around me. I stood there in Adrian's jacket, barefoot on hardwood floors, listening to the silence like it might break. It did not. Instead, my phone lit up on the entry table where I had left it earlier. One new message from the same unknown number. Do not be afraid of closed doors. Some of them are how you keep your life. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, and for the second time in one night, I knew with absolute certainty that Adrian had not rescued me just to disappear. He was still there somehow, just beyond the edges of my ordinary world, watching the line between danger and dignity, as if he had already decided it belonged to him to guard. The apartment stayed quiet after that, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that made every sound sharper, every shadow more intentional. I locked the deadbolt, checked it twice, then stood there with my hand still on the door, as if I could feel the outline of the night pressing against the other side. My phone remained lit on the entry table, Adrian's message glowing up at me like a private promise spoken through glass and distance. Do not be afraid of closed doors. Some of them are how you keep your life. I read it again, then set the phone down carefully, almost gently, because suddenly it felt less like a device and more like a line tied to something I did not fully understand yet. Sleep was impossible after that. I made tea I did not drink, paced from the couch to the kitchen and back, and every few minutes found myself touching the sleeve of Adrian's jacket where it hung over my shoulders, as if the weight of it could keep my thoughts from drifting too far into dangerous places. At 2 in the morning, the city outside my window softened into scattered headlights and the distant hiss of tires on damp pavement. At 3, my building finally settled into complete silence. At 4, I gave up pretending I was going back to bed and curled up on the couch with a blanket and the kind of exhaustion that sat behind my eyes instead of in my bones. I woke to my alarm at 7:30 feeling like I had barely closed them. Morning light leaked through the blinds in pale gray stripes, turning my tiny living room into something almost calm. For a few seconds, the night before felt unreal again. Then I saw the charcoal jacket draped over the armchair and remembered all of it at once. Ethan. The restaurant. Adrian's hand held out across a ruined evening like fate, wearing a wristwatch that cost more than my rent. My phone had 14 unread messages. 12 were from Ethan. I deleted them without opening a single one. The 13th was from my friend Lila asking how dinner went, followed by 3 increasingly concerned question marks. The last message was from the unknown number. Good morning. You are allowed. To block people who only call when they want access, not connection. I stared at the screen so long my coffee maker clicked off behind me. Then, before I could overthink it, I blocked Ethan's number. My thumb hovered for 1 second before pressing confirm. That was all it took. 1 second to erase a doorway he had kept using long after he forfeited the right to enter. The quiet afterward felt strange. Cleaner. I got dressed for work with the mechanical movements of someone trying not to examine her own life too closely. Navy slacks, cream blouse, low black heels sensible enough for subway stairs and 10-hour days. I worked in event planning for a boutique firm that handled everything from corporate launches to museum galas, which meant my job looked glamorous from the outside and mostly involved managing impossible personalities with a smile that never reached my molars. Normally, I was good at it. That morning, I spilled concealer on my bathroom sink and almost laughed at the irony. I had spent months covering what hurt. Apparently, I was out of practice at hiding. Lila spotted me the second I stepped into the office. "Wow," she said, wheeling away from her desk with a paper cup of iced coffee in one hand. "You look like you fought a war with your mascara and lost." "Good morning to you too." She narrowed her eyes. "That bad?" I set my bag down and glanced around the open office. Phones ringing. Printers humming. Someone in sales already pretending the rest of us were the reason his morning was difficult. Ordinary. Comforting. Worse, I admitted. Lila leaned in immediately. "Tell me everything." So I told her most of it. The restaurant. Ethan. The humiliation. The way a stranger had stepped in with all the calm authority of a man who had never once doubted the force of his own presence. I left out the last name at first. Maybe because saying Adrian Moretti out loud in fluorescent office lighting felt absurd, like dragging thunder into a conference room. But Lila was too smart to miss the omissions. "Okay," she said slowly, stirring her coffee. "And this mysterious rescuer has a name. Adrian." "Adrian what?" I hesitated. That alone told her enough. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, not that Adrian." Apparently that Adrian. She set her coffee down so fast it sloshed. Over the lid. "Claire, I know. No, I do not think you do." She lowered her voice. "Do you have any idea who he is?" "Enough to know that people get very quiet around him. That is not the same as knowing." Before I could answer, my desk phone rang. Then my cell. Then the front office line, all within 10 seconds of each other, creating a weird, overlapping chorus of urgency that made both of us look up. Melanie, our receptionist, popped around the corner with an expression I had only ever seen on people who had just realized a celebrity was standing in their lobby. "Claire," she said breathlessly, "there is a delivery here for you. And, there are 4 men downstairs who look like they might own Manhattan." My heartbeat stumbled. Lila's mouth fell open. "Please tell me that is a joke." It was not. 10 minutes later, a long matte black box sat on my desk tied with a cream ribbon so elegant it made every bouquet I had ever sent to clients look apologetic. No card on top. No florist logo. Just my name written in sharp, unmistakably masculine handwriting. Claire. Around the office, conversations had lowered into fascinated whispers. I could feel eyes on me from every cubicle and glass office in a 10-foot radius. My hands were steady when I untied the ribbon. That surprised me. Inside the box lay a single white rose, a leather-bound planner in deep navy, and a folded note. I opened it carefully. The paper was thick, expensive, and almost absurdly simple. "Since your day should begin with order, not aftermath. My car will be outside at 6. We need to discuss what happens next. Adrian." My office disappeared around the note in my hand. The phones kept ringing, keyboards kept clicking, someone laughed too loudly near the break room. But all of it faded beneath the quiet certainty of those 2 sentences. "Since your day should begin with order, not aftermath. My car will be outside at 6. We need to discuss what happens next. Adrian." Not Mr. Moretti. Not a signature wrapped in distance or hierarchy. Just Adrian. As if the man who made entire rooms rearrange themselves had decided that with me, at least in private, he would not hide behind formality. "Well," Lila hissed from beside my desk, practically vibrating with curiosity. I folded the note once, then again, buying myself a second to think. "He sent a planner," I said weakly. Lila stared at me. "Claire." "And a white rose." "Claire." I finally handed her the note. She read it. then looked up with an expression that was equal parts alarm and envy and the kind of interest usually reserved for headlines involving power, money, and emotional damage. "He is not asking," she said. "No," I murmured. "He is not." The strange thing was, I did not feel offended by that. I should have. On paper, everything about Adrian Moretti should have set off every alarm I possessed. The name, the presence, the way he moved through the city as if resistance was just another inconvenience to be managed. But there was a difference between assumption and disrespect, and so far Adrian had never once spoken to me like my choices were irrelevant. Even now, reading his note again in my head, I could feel the distinction. He had not written "Be ready." He had not written "You are coming with me." He had written "We need to discuss what happens next." Not command. Invitation wrapped in inevitability, maybe, but still an invitation. The workday passed in fragments. I answered emails, approved floral samples for a charity auction in Tribeca, nodded through a client call about seating charts and custom lighting, but my mind kept slipping back to the note in my top drawer and the jacket still folded over the chair in my apartment. At 12:15, Melanie came to my desk and whispered that the 4 men downstairs were still there. "Still?" I asked. She nodded. "They are not doing anything. They are just existing in a very expensive way." Lila nearly choked on her coffee. I went to the window at the end of the hall and looked down at the street. 2 black sedans sat parked across from the building, impossible to miss once you knew to look for them. Men in dark coats stood nearby, alert without appearing agitated, blending into Midtown while somehow making the entire block feel more controlled than it had an hour ago. Not surveillance exactly. Presence. Protection. The realization landed slowly and all at once. Adrian had not sent them to impress me. He had sent them because Ethan had shown up at my apartment after midnight and Adrian, in that unnerving, precise way of his, had already adjusted the world accordingly. At 5:47, my computer screen blurred in front of me. I shut it down, gathered my things, and ignored the wave of attention that followed me through the office. By the time I reached the lobby, the 4 men had straightened almost imperceptibly. One of them stepped forward and opened the front door before I touched it. Outside, the city was turning gold with early evening, the glass towers catching the last light while traffic crawled up the avenue in ribbons of red. The familiar black sedan waited at the curb. This time Adrian was inside. I saw him the moment the rear passenger door opened, seated in the shadowed leather interior with one hand resting on his knee, dark suit immaculate, gray eyes already on me, as if he had known the exact second I would appear. "Good evening, Claire," he said, and that voice did something unfair to my heartbeat. I stood there on the sidewalk with the planner in my bag, his note in my coat pocket, and my entire ordinary life lined up behind me in office windows and fluorescent reflections. "You said we needed to discuss what happens next," I said. Adrian's gaze held mine, calm and devastating and far too certain. "Yes," he replied, "because after last night, your life intersects with mine now, and I would prefer you hear the truth from me before the city decides to tell you its version."